everyone, and welcome to this special event by the Barbados Museum and Historical Society looking at Barbados and museums in 2030. What will Barbados look like in 2030, and where do museums fit in the picture? Using the science of scenario planning, our feature speaker, Greg Hoyos, will present alternate visions of 2030 in Barbados with opportunities and risks. He will then be in conversation with Barbados Museum Deputy Director Kevin Farmer on the role of museums in his scenarios and potential frameworks for the Barbados Museum Historical Society. We look forward to you participating in the discussion through your questions and comments, which you can submit either in the Q&A panel or by raising your hand in Zoom, or if you're joining us on Facebook, you can submit your questions in the comment thread of this live stream. I would now like to invite the Deputy Director of the Barbados Museum and Historical Society, Kevin Farmer, to give a few introductory words.
Good afternoon. Hi, Greg. Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much for being here. I don't really have a lot to say. Really looking forward to not just Greg's presentation, but the discussion out of it. Scenario planning makes you think of the worst case, but sometimes it comes up with the better case solutions. And for that, we're extremely grateful that Greg has taken the time out to focus his attention as it relates to museum and culture, and I look forward to discussion. And I guess in a way for me at the museum to frame it in light that in 3 years' time, the museum will be 90 years old. 10 years after that will be a century. And then 20 years after that. And what discussions like this help us to frame is not only who do we want to be, but who should we be for future Barbados. So I'm really thrilled about this discussion tonight. So thank you, Natalie.
Thanks, Kevin. I would now like to introduce our featured speaker this evening, Mr. Greg Hoyos. After graduating from Ryerson University, Greg Hoyos started his first ad agency with clients Colgate-Palmolive and Barclays Bank. Creatively, he has won 5 Clio Awards, numerous Caribbean Addies, and in 1981, he published a book on marketing in the Caribbean titled Marketing in Demand, and in 2015, a subsequent publication titled How We Got Here, A History of Marketing in 32 Objects. In 1982, he relocated to Sydney, Australia, where he served on the boards of 2 multinational ad agencies, Leo Burnett and DDB Worldwide, and also wrote a marketing column for a national marketing weekly. While there, he was voted into the top 10 outstanding advertising personalities in Australia, polled by CEOs. He was the only non-Aussie to make the list. Returning to the Caribbean, he re-established a regional agency representing DDB Worldwide for 29 years before its closure in 2019. He was also trained in scenario planning by the University of Houston and Global Business Network. He now lives in the USA. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you. Should I just get started?
Yes, sure.
Okay, here we go. Thanks, everyone. This is a presentation which will last about 30 minutes if I get it right. And hopefully it'll be entertaining and thought-provoking, as well as quite serious. So scenario planning is an interesting way, as Kevin alluded, to look at the future, both in good ways and in bad ways, to things that could go badly, things that could go well. And we have done it before, and of course we can do it again. So today, let me start by asking you a simple question. Our partners in Europe have said that there are all these businesses which are destined to fail by 2030. Supermarkets, post offices, banks, etc., as you can see. And my question obviously for today is, should we also add museums to that? It's a cogent question for the moment. What will happen to us all come 2030? What will our role be? Which is what we'll talk about later on, and we'll put some ideas together and ask for your opinions. So business as usual in the future will not be business as usual. I spoke to some businessmen last week, and I told them that they were doing very well on an old model, and they needed a new model to succeed. So we'll see where that goes. So today, I'd like to talk about these four things. One is give you an example of scenario planning from 2003. Look at the futures for Barbados as we saw them recently for 2030. Discuss wild cards for a moment because everyone said, what about COVID? What about soufre? And it's a good question, but we have to put those into perspective. And then finally, a chat with everyone about seeking the museum's role. And I'll try to be provocative and give you something to think about and argue about and disagree about. So here's an example from 2003. We were looking forward to 2015. And by the way, as a bit of fun, I've found some lovely old illustrations. This one is from the 1930s, and they were projecting the future of telephones and communications. And as you can see, they got a lot right. They've got the idea of talking to someone that you can see on a machine. It looks a bit clunky, but they got a few things right. And that was interesting. So back in 2003, the media came to us and asked us a question. The media said, what's it going to be like in 2015? And what will our business be like? Now, let me take you back for a moment to 2003 and to see what we had to work with and what our frame of reference was. In 2003, there was no iPhone. In 2003, YouTube did not yet exist. Back then, Gmail did not exist. In 2003, the Barbados National Bank and BS&T were both Barbadian companies still, not owned by Trinidad. Tiger Woods wasn't married or disgraced, and Rihanna was in Foundation High School. So that's the reference point for 2003. And it seems like an age ago now, but that's what was happening. So our job was to look ahead for the media. And it was the media came to us, this was CBC, Starcom, and The Nation, and said, tell us what you think is going to happen for the future. So we did all of our work. We ran through before we do that, we ran through all of our exercises, did all, and we came up with several possible futures for 2015. Now we have the luxury, because we're now in 2021, to look back and see how did we get it right? How did we get it wrong? What did we foresee? What did we miss? And so on. So it's fun to look back and see. And I found in my files recordings of our actual scenarios which we had done for the client. So I'm going to go back and then start it. Here we go. This is one of them, one of several we did, and we'll see exactly how we got it right or what we said. This lasts about 3 minutes, and it's actually Alan Shepard who recorded this one for us.
Or emerging tribes.
Perfect.
By 2015, all the old rules have long been broken. Data is freely, widely available. Unauthorized hacking and database infiltration, disruption, endemic. But the value of data is also shorter, less effective. Almost every piece of information about everyone is widely spread on the net. So, privacy firms which promise protection are the new growth industry. People are reluctant to surf the web on their own computers, preferring instead to go back to a kiosk service where they can hopefully be anonymous. The old mass media have atomized into smaller personal versions, with the chief players bewildered and struggling to find value in the new business model. The old media brand names mean little to younger people. Technology generates piecemeal media feeds and cheap bots, with the resultant ability to create your own channel. On TV alone, there's a Muslim news feed, a rap news, feedback news, a women's news, etc. Also popular is the news section where communities and individuals come in and broadcast their own views to their friends and whoever will watch. Audiences of under 100 are common these days. Because of government inactivity and localized violence against and among kids. Schools have largely fallen into disrepair, with equipment thefts also rampant. The school as a building is now an irrelevant concept. So, enterprise and shadow teachers moonlight from schools and teach over the web to a minority, white and Indian, students at home. They simply log in from 9 to 3 and work on their computers. They rarely meet each other. Government itself is a moving assembly of pressure groups, which coalesce, break up, and mingle again. Parliament is irrelevant, politics divisive, as parties squabble over meager resources. There's a huge brain drain, some of it physical, but most of it via the web. Meanwhile, virtual evangelists spring up on the web, along with new eccentrics and new religions. But one piece of hope is a fledgling cultural renaissance, as small artists use the internet to flower and bloom in a way they never could before. Society itself has splintered into cults, races, minorities, with reduced interaction and social glue. Each grouping builds virtual walls around itself. Police and Barbados Defense Force crime becomes rampant as these people seek to support themselves and the reduced government payments. This is effectively a form of informal taxation. Local business is essentially a bazaar, selling everything legal or illegal from the US. There are a few large companies left, and the dog-eat-dog mentality is widespread. The bigger companies have set up in Miami or Fort Lauderdale to supply locals, and the US dollar is the region's daily currency.
So, looking at Barbados for 2030, we just completed, and the reason for this is we just completed a study for a major multinational Caribbean client. They asked the question, what will e-commerce look like in 2030? And they are multinational with several companies, so that we did not focus on any one particular industry. We looked at the whole region and where it was going to go. And then we have projected based on what Kevin asked, where museums might fit. So I'll move through this pretty quickly so we can get to the real interesting part. Where will it be in e-commerce terms in 2030? Here's a fun one, a comment, which this famous guy said, Yogi Berra, I never predict, especially about the future. And our objective was to give them a regional look at where we were going, Barbados and the region. So here's the plan. You get the facts, what you want to get at. You look at key external forces, key factors, critical uncertainties, which we'll talk about, the logics, early indicators, and so on. And we follow this framework, which you'll see in a moment as we go through it. We asked a lot of questions about a lot of issues. And everyone, it was, where are we now? What do we know? What we don't know? Remember, this was all done in 2019 and completed then. We asked about politics, global politics, technology, self-realization, churches and people and what's happening with religions and so on, society, economics, a whole number of things we put together to see where are we going. Tourism, local commerce, where is it going? This one on local commerce upset my friend Eddie Abed a lot, but he had agreed it was accurate. And here's the point about local commerce. If we go fully into an Amazon model of delivery, can our roads sustain that? And the answer is probably not. We can't have that many deliveries going on. So there you go, lots of things are happening. Humans versus artificial intelligence, we're going to see some, how much, what's the environment going to be like, when will the when will the seas kill off the South Coast Road, when will there be another sewage failure? As you can see, there are a whole number of issues you want to look at to see where it's going, where they might be going. Local retail, consumers, we're aging, we're getting older, we're paying less tax, and so on. And In addition to this, we spoke to a whole bunch of poets, artists, business people, historians, all kinds of people to get their facts. Because what we wanted was unusual views, not stuff like it's going to be okay. I can see the future. It's a straight line. We want to know what could go wrong. Having got all those facts, we try to do two things. One, say, how much impact will these have? Will they be a low impact, medium impact, or high impact? And then also, how likely are they to happen? And so will it be low, medium, or likelihood? What's going to happen? Out of that, and I won't dwell on this, but you can see comes a matrix of some of the issues that may be ahead of us, some may be coming to us, some may be more options or more alternatives than others, or more likely than others to happen. So that's how you end up with where you're going. But then most important, we ended up with two critical uncertainties in which everything else has to fit, we thought. Everything else about futures, about where we're going. One is, will our economy in 2030 be a failing economy or a surviving economy? Very big question. And the other one was, will our society be cohesive or splintering? As things get tough, we are already seeing some splintering in the Barbados society. We're seeing the shootings, we're seeing the gunplay, we're seeing a brick for yourself. But Barbados historically has always had a very cohesive society. We have problems, we all know that, but we're not Jamaica, we're not Trinidad, we're not Guyana, we're not at war with each other, which they have often been. So you put these two together, you get a matrix, and you start to find a way to plan scenarios with all the other issues that could come. And here, 4 scenarios that we did, just play them a moment. Here we go. If the economy is cohesive, sorry, our society is cohesive and the economy fails, you would get one scenario of things happening. Cohesion in society, but all kinds of problems. If society splinters and the economy fails, you're going to get that me first attitude of me, things happening that are not very nice, a fragmenting society. If the economy survives and we hold together, then we're back to the 60s where we would look after each other, have modest expectations, live quietly, and work things to suit, which Barbados has always done. And if society, can hold and what here's the last one, you get social rupture. Because although the economy is surviving, the society is not, it's breaking down. So that gives you 4 outlines of 4 possible futures for Barbados in 2030. Within each of those, there's all the other issues of the seas rising, of things happening, and so on. But these are the 4 basic ones. And I'll read you some points about them in a moment for your interest to see where we were. So here's what I call a mashup of some of our futures as to where we are going, as to what's happening. By the way, this picture is from the 1950s. Somebody was imagining back then what home shopping on TV would look like. They got a lot right, didn't they? I mean, it's not too bad, although we would laugh at that now. So here, for your enjoyment, are not one single one, but some ideas or some thoughts as to what might happen in 2030. We said you could see this selfish attitude, society breaking down, not the old Barbados of holding together. Security, therefore, home security is expensive. The Barbados Defense Force might moonlight as security guards because they can't get paid otherwise, and they need the money. So we give men guns and send them out, and they can have, they could do violent things while looking after us. Another one, a different one, sees the opposite. If we can hold together and the economy can survive somehow, we could become a model society for the whole world. we can become an example of how a small, vulnerable country can live together and make it work. Um, we would have what we call glorified frugality, people not buying things too much, people being careful, people supporting each other, much more economizing and looking after each other in the good old simple days. But again, one, we can have online doctors because people won't want to come out to the doctor too often. There'll be Zoom calls to the doctor. This is already happening in the USA. You go to the doctor on Zoom. We know that the polyclinics are stressed, so it gets them off the hook from that point of view. And we can have what we project to be webinar colleges. Why go to school physically when you can go to school on the web? You get a degree. It won't get you a job overseas, but a webinar college degree might be good enough for local use. People can do that. That's a completely different look altogether. By the way, if we became the model society that we saw above, that brings problems because immigration would soar. Everyone would want to come and live in this model society, which means that real estate prices would go up and the government will have to introduce some serious controls. So no scenario is all perfect. The world doesn't work that way. They're good and bad in each one. We saw in one case desperation in tourism, shrinkage in tourism, which is our main industry. We saw the tourist industry projecting to have different approaches. So tiny rooms, small rooms, experience tours, different things that we're trying to compete. But tourism will become a lesser employer, and you will see artificial intelligence, for example, checking you into hotels. You don't need a person at a desk. You show your passport or whatever, you check in, you get your key, and off you go. So a lot of things could happen in tourism. We saw corruption because if government has no money or is short of money and gives more and more work to private enterprise, you could see corruption of contracts being given out to the highest bidder. You can see all kinds of things that we don't want to happen. Yet the churches, small as they are, will continue their power over people because the government wants the church to keep people in line. Plus the LGBTQ. We're optimistic about this. We think that LGBTQ heroes and heroines will be much stronger in 2030. We see them happening. We'll see the forces of reaction, especially churches and so on, fighting against them. But the move is probably going to be inexorable and they will happen. And that's going to be very interesting to see what the society looks like. Bridgetown, we think, is going to become really a theme park with a few shops. Bridgetown is gone. There are people trying to rekindle it for living in, for habitation. We don't see that happening by 2030. That's going to be, I think, a real problem. Just as I said, upset my friend Eddie about a lot, but he doesn't really have an answer for it either. If we get a tram a really good tram going from the harbor to the Broad Street, that could help a little bit. It's a theme park. We talked about this earlier, home deliveries. If we got an Amazon here or just-in-time deliveries and more people delivering things and not buying them, you're going to have intolerable road congestion. It's going to be very hard. Our roads already are stressed. It's going to be even worse. And we know that drones won't work in Barbados because of our power lines and our narrow areas. So drones really won't work. And of course, you get congestion and you get pollution. We see Mia as the first president of the Republic. We were being a bit funny here, but we will be a republic by 2030. And who better to be than our retired, by then, retired and very tired, but very successful prime minister. We see also a chance of food shortages. Barbados is already tough, hard to supply food. We don't grow that much anymore. We see aquaponics, as a possibility. We see that happening more and more, but we see food shortages coming more and more. And then, perhaps most ominously, and this came from a historian, if the society is breaking down, we see a social unrest happening because it'll be 100 years in 2037 from the riots of 1937, and history has a way of repeating itself, and people may well take to the streets to have to get what they want, what they need, what they demand, and go and fight on the streets for it. So a bunch of good, a bunch of bad, a bunch of things happening for the future, and that's what we saw. And we can come back and argue about these in a moment, but we'll carry on to get to the end. So the summary is we need to explore many options. We need to think the unthinkable, not just, oh, things will be fine, or things will be tough, but we'll survive. Think the unthinkable. Now, finally, before we go, wild cards, COVID and so on. COVID, souffleur, rising seas, they're all distractions. Remember, we are thinking the long term. We're thinking 10 years. Someone who asked me about COVID was a business person, and they tend to think very short term. Thinking long term, you have to put these to one side and see these are accelerants or these are decelerants, but they are basically distractions, and they will happen, they will go away. In 3 or 4 years' time, COVID will be a memory, we think, unless the variants come in. So here are some thoughts on COVID. What about the variants? They look pretty bad right now. How many people can be vaccinated and get vaccinated? Will countries work together or not? These are the questions you have to ask. But this is all very new. Consumers are mentally exhausted from COVID, from working at home, from not having enough money. We're exhausted. We're doing things differently. We have less money. We're buying less. We have money worries generally all over. We think that the tourism will recover very slowly worldwide. We don't see that being a fast recovery, which worries us because that's our business. And the outlook of, or the outlash of parties and so on will end after you've been to enough parties. You say, okay, that was it, fine. So right now everyone's out and about and yeah, party, but that will end. And so COVID is going to be a passing thing, important, but a passing thing. So, and of course, remote business, the office will never be the same again. But right now, people are fighting over how much office and how much home to have, homework that is to have. And that's still being discussed and worked out. So in summary, there will always be wild cards, jokers, and surprises, but you mustn't let them overtake your vision for the long-term future. Business people are notoriously bad at looking at the short term. We need to look at the long term to see where we're going. So finally, what's the role or any role of the Museum and Historical Society in any of these futures? I'll put it a different way. If any of these futures are right or partly right, or any combination thereof, what's the future for a museum? Where are we going? The whole world is looking at this question. You look around and you see all the issues being discussed. The old model of having a room and having people come to that room and look at something and leave again seems to be over or largely over. And I see the museum here is looking for ways to improve that, G it up, make it more interesting. But the old model as it stands is in trouble. Even the Louvre is worried, and the Met, they're worried. What chance do we have? But by the way, this is a very interesting picture, which I think you may have seen. It was widely misunderstood. It said, people said, oh my God, the world is ending. Here's a wonderful piece of art. And all the kids are ignoring it and looking at their phones. In fact, for those of you who know, the Rijksmuseum, which is a great museum, had a program where kids, the students would come, look at the art, and then go on their phones and be given more information about the piece of art and about what happened in the background. This is actually was interaction and a deep dive. It wasn't an ignoring, but it still is a very cautionary tale. So I'd say definitely follow, to look at the ahead for the museum, follow the same outline. Where are we going? What do we need to do? What could it be? Where do we go? And I can send this off to Kevin afterwards. Follow that. But then, how can we be relevant in 2030? You need a strategy. You need to work out with your people. Who are we going after? You know, who really is our target? Is it young people? Is it old people? How do we reach them? What do they want? Do they want to look at something? Do they want an experience? Do they want an immersion? And I'm sure, not sure that they know, but what we need here is strategy and real research. Um, where are we going to do this? In a building like before? Are we going to go out? I know we've done some of that here. Where are we going to do it? Do we do it when? Do we do it online 24/7 or between 8:30 and 4 o'clock in the day? When do we do that? Again, how do we present it? By cell phones, online? What do we do? And why? And here's the big issue. Here's the big question that Kevin asked me to think about. What's the role of the museum? I think the role of the museum going forward is to tell us who we are. We have got a really amazing, brutal, fantastic, everything history. We, but we have never discovered who we are as Bajans. Most of us came here unwillingly. Most of us, all of us are in some way immigrants. Who are we? Where are we going to be? What's our role for the future? And we haven't decided that yet. I don't think anyone knows that yet. And that could be the Museum and Historical Society's big mission. But let's have some fun. Let's have some fun about things that along the way you might want to do, and then I wrap up. So this is fun. Don't take this for granted. This is just some ideas I've brought together. Uh, of course, there's outreach. You get temporary and topical displays. You go out, you show things. You go to schools. There's a movement called the five senses, which is museums should help us smell, feel, see, experience, all these things. That takes money. Museums in the US are looking at this, but how do you engage a person more than just having an inanimate object in a room? And that's going to be the big question. What do you do? How do you recreate events? How could we see Rachel Pringle in her life, and so on? We need alliances. We need to get together because we need to share money. And you've got all these different people, the trust and the dance theater and so on, and they need help as much as anybody else. We did some work before for the National Trust, and they have the same issues. How do you get people to come in? So my advice is reach out, talk to people, get them in. Excuse me. What are some events? Have a time capsule. What would you do, students and people, if you were leaving a time capsule to be discovered in 2050 or whatever? And that forces us to think, who are we? What do we want? Where are we going? Or have an experience like, live like it's 1850. No more phones, no more fancy food, no more takeaway, no more KFC. Can you live for a day like it's 1850? You have a room from the 1930s or 50s, which is good to look at, but it's unfortunately a dead room. It's there. How about a room just left, sort of a Marie Celeste room, where people are either walking out or just left, and you could be there. We talked about Rachel Pringle and others. How do we bring them back to life? How do we make some of our heroes come to life? What are the fads? We used to have something called hula hoops. We keep getting skateboards, yes and no. We keep having all kinds of things. Bring them back because you're trying to find out who we are. And we imagine events as today. What would happen with the riots if they happened today? What would they be like? What could we do? All these things are just ideas to get you going. And I've said use the facade of the museum as a medium. So project things onto it at night, let it come alive. Let's just have people, you have a wonderful audience driving by every night. Use it for various things. We actually did these two drawings for the National Trust a few years ago. We were trying to get this same idea where we said step into a time machine, tour a great house, walk with history, authentic heritage. But this still doesn't solve the problem of how to make it come alive. But you can see that there are ideas you can take. They never use these because of money and other issues, but how do you make it work? And money. You need new corporate plans. You need to get corporations involved somehow. You need somehow to get people to have somehow I want to be a member. Put yourself in a museum. There is a very good technique used in the USA where you can buy a brick and put your name on it and pay 100 US or whatever. But your name goes into the museum, in your case, perhaps into the courtyard or somewhere, and your name is there forever. Cafe concession, how to get we address this, how to get taxi drivers to bring people. And we discussed this a lot for the National Trust. We talked to taxi drivers, and they were like, "What's in it for me? I'll bring people, I'll bring tourists, but what's in it for me?" And of course, some sort of a heritage or a cultural passport where you can get people to go to several outlets and several locations together. That's just some fun ideas that we put together to make you laugh and to say there are all kinds of ideas, but they should be within a strategy. They should be working together as a strategy. So here's a major benefit. Futures planning is like a wind tunnel for your strategy. If you can see what the future is looking like, if you have a wind tunnel, will it work in that future? Will it not work? Where are we going? And that's a nice thing to have. Here are my last thoughts. Don't get hung up on predictions. Don't get the future perfect. It's not going to happen. Use signposts to see which of the futures is coming true, what we might be, and go ahead. So my summary is you can anticipate the future. It's happened. We've done several studies and got the future pretty well right. I'll give you a quick story. I asked K.F. Shepherd a few years ago, why did they accelerate their move to selling out of the actual retail? And they said, because you told us to back in 1995. I'd forgotten that. We projected a very bad future for retail, and so they got out. Deal with the wild cards. There are always going to be wild cards happening, but don't let them distract where we're going from. This is the long view we're looking for. Adopt a framework that you want to be sure. There's a framework to keep you online, keep you where you're going, and find your future. And that's it. There are lots of ideas for where the museum might be within a future for Barbados. So last thought is from Dwight Eisenhower. Plans are useless, but planning is vital. And he said this just before D-Day in World War II. And we know how that ended. It ended well. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being online. Discussion, comments, disagreements. Kevin, over to you.
Thank you, Greg. I want to thank the audience who's joined us as well. Food for thought. There's some things there that we started to do. There's some things there that we probably will never do. There was something that one of the slides that you put up where it said good old 60s. I'm sure that a set of us who were born in the 70s would totally disagree and say that the 70s were way better.
That's fine. That's fine.
But first, before I start my questions, I'll probably ask and see if there are any questions coming from our attendees before we dive in.
Yeah.
Oh no, disagreement always brings the best questions and sometimes the better solutions as well.
For sure.
Yeah, we don't. Oh, sorry, Kevin. I was saying we don't currently have any questions or comments from the audience, but just a quick reminder that if you do want to join the discussion as a participant in Zoom, you can drop your question in the Q&A or raise your hand and we'll open the mic to you. Or if you're watching on Facebook, you can drop your questions and comments in the comment section of the live stream.
So Greg, what I'll note from, especially when the audio clip was played, geez, people have a really dystopian look at what the future will be. Very, very, very little silver in all that was not glittering. But I'll make the argument that as long as there are societies, there are museums that will either reflect who we are or seek to reflect who we should be. And that is perhaps one of the mechanisms that allows museums to survive. It's what museums do, as you correctly said, and how they seek to engage that will speak to any type of sustainability.
Right.
I have a question here from Therese Yard, who said, Kevin mentioned that museums are already exploring some of the options Greg presented. Could he tell us more about these explorations? Sure, not that I necessarily want to get into to all. So I'll use these 3 examples. Greg talked about using a brick by brick campaign in order to develop spaces. And we did do that a couple of years ago. If you've ever visited the museum or you've seen our walled garden theater, that very much was driven by a brick by brick campaign. Both those who bought small bricks, those who bought individual bricks, and those who bought truckloads of bricks. And if you come to the space, you can actually see their name up on a wall on plaques, so you know who donated and when. So that type of engagement where we engage the community to build out something that they have an interest in for us works. In terms of senses and engagement, I would argue what we're doing today is a form of engagement, and we've been doing quite a few of these since COVID. COVID has really had to make us pivot hard because people aren't going to come to 4 walls, but we could bring what's in 4 walls to them. And I think that is working to build awareness. It's about taking that awareness now and using it to provide sustainability for organizations like us. I think that's pivotal. And I think the other thing we need to realize is that museums, how should I put this nicely? Museums are for the societies in which they're in. Those people who come and visit the society, it's okay for them to come through, but the museum exists for the people who live here. And I think that's one of the more critical things we must remember as to why we exist. Hence why it's so important to hear from us. What do you want to see in a museum? Or our new tagline is, our museum, your stories, our museum. Our museum, our stories.
People often don't know what they want to see, so be careful.
That is all. You sound very much like Steve Jobs. People don't know what they want. And Job said that. But sometimes in hearing what people want, you can decide what works and what doesn't. But the new, how should I put it? The new focus, the new ideology in the community world is about that engagement, because you belong to a community. The curator is no longer the person who knows everything, and they should never even think that way. They're facilitators to a heritage. They're not the guardians of it. So that's necessary, especially in a society that is getting smaller and getting older and getting more diverse. The museum then has to be the space where the multiple voices feel safe enough that their story can actually be told. But finishing off Therese's question, in terms of senses, in a couple weeks' time, we'll be opening a brand new children's gallery that is based around the 5 senses. And that is based around the idea of play and learning through play. So I think when you come to that, you will begin to see where we're beginning to pivot in how we tell the various stories and how we engage and how we try to spark the imagination, especially the young children looking to come through. And that's where I do definitely agree with Greg that alliances are definitely important. We've always done them. Done them almost on a project basis, but I think it's time where we do it a bit more systematically. So, for instance, the Barbados Dance Theatre is now using our Wall Garden Theatre as their dance studio since they've reopened after COVID and since their studio dance theatre burnt. So again, that's in a form of alliance. We do it with the youth theatre at the Barbados Community College, where in fact we get them to come in and reenact and reimagine certain histories. And that has proven to be quite successful. But it's about making it sustainable. So that's where the ability to draw in that corporate money and other monies is extremely important and and necessary for the growth and development of museums. And then of course to allow us to move beyond the four walls. The digital um, perhaps can provide some of that. But again, the thing about digital is it moves so quickly. You sometimes need to be careful what format are you going to use, and are you willing to spend the money as formats change to change with them. But it is a fantastic way by which we can further the engagement, reach literally more people that would ever come through the physical space at any one time. But I think we have to do the fine balance and spice it just right. There are those who still want that physical entrance. There are those who want to do the digital. And as technology increases, who's to say that VR or augmented does not allow for sensory perception that might in fact give you the five senses?
And right now,
Um,
right
yep.
now in USA, there is a tour of Van Gogh's paintings, and you can actually walk among them. It's coming to near to where we live, and I'm hoping to get out there to see it. Now, to me, it's a bit of a joke because I don't really need to walk into the paintings, but it's a different way of looking at them. And so they're
Yes.
trying something, like you just said, no one has the answer, but they're trying something to see if it works. If it works, they can expand it or do something different. But to walk among Starry Night, one of his famous things, would be fantastic. But is it enough or is it just a gimmick? We don't know yet. They're doing very well in terms of tickets. Let's see what happens.
Well, as a marketer, you well know sometimes gimmicks pay off.
Yeah, yeah, oh, yeah.
You know, and they become almost a pilot, and people refine it to the point where you don't need that big massive space or that amount of money to create the experience. You can scale it down because what they've done is a quite scale up. I mean, I've seen the photos. I would like to visit because it's an amazing feat of engineering.
Yes. It'll
Um,
be very expensive. I don't know.
and well, it has to be extremely expensive. The types of projectors that they've used and to get it so refined, the throws have to be spot on. So yes, it is expensive. Hence why it's being done the way it's doing. They're touring it and they're hoping that they're getting a couple thousand people to come through. That won't happen in the region unless we get airfare down to almost $20 a person because the amount of people that need to come through that type of exhibition to make it
Yes.
financially viable won't work
Only
in our
one example.
space.
It's just one
Yeah,
example.
there's one example, but it's not a bad one because a touring exhibition around the region for those things which are regional might be interesting. I'll say cricket, but clearly I'll keep it post 1999 so that people get that good feeling. That
Yes.
that might be an interesting tour that alliances could help happen. Um, but yes, I like the idea that you had about cafe concessions. Although I think people will tell you that the food industry is a tad fickle at times. The margins are small, so they tell me. But then I see more and more people selling food. So clearly, it's making money somehow. And
It may make them stay longer as well. If we can do a bit of a tour, have some lunch and then go back. It may lengthen the time there.
agree. And I'm hoping, Therese, that I did answer your questions, but it was a really good one. And what I will also say, since you're still there, is if you've got any ideas or what are some of the things you would like to see in a reimagined museum and reimagined museum exhibits, please share with us. If you can't share them with us today, maybe sometime in the next week or a couple of months, but please do share them with us. It's very, very important. Um, I what I will say is, what are museums for? To answer your really big question, um, multiple things, including reflection of self, creation of self,
Tell us who
the
we are.
tell us who we are, exploring those difficult parts of our history that we're far enough removed from it and we don't have enough information about it that we can tell the facts, let people see all sides of the story and let them decide. um, Even recognizing now, over the last 2 years, we are living in and through two major historical events. One is global, which is COVID. One is slightly more regional, and that is the eruption of Soufrière, which for the second time in my lifetime has impacted us in Barbados.
Yeah.
And maybe because I'm older, it seems more severe, the impaction, than it did in '79. But it's times like these now where we have to, as we go through it, recognize that we need to collect the memories and collect the memorabilia, artifacts around these happenings, and begin to detail them, because in less than 30 years, they're going to be a distant memory. And people, if they happen again, will be all in shock, not recognizing, oh, but we've been here. This is how we would have dealt with it in the past. What can we learn from the past to help us in the future? I'm told that we've got some questions from the audience. I'll let Natalie go ahead and ask them for us.
Sure, thanks, Kevin. So the first one we have is from Anne Harding, who asks, to what extent do you think we should make museum exhibits available online?
I think if you're asking me, I think you have to do it, but online is not the same as in physically. So it's a double-edged sword. The online allows you to see more things, and as you know, and Anne would know, you can go to many museums right now online around the world. There is a there are a series of websites, but it's a different feeling to actually being there, and it doesn't engage the five senses. So it has advantages, but it's not the only answer. It does help, but it's not the only answer. You want to be able to grab, feel, be there, experience.
What I'll add to that, Anne, is yes, you can't physically be there. I do believe that some of a museum's collections can be online, especially where it can be used not only just to tell a story, but to get you to come to the physical space, and also more important, well, as importantly, to get you perhaps to believe in the mission of the museum, whereby you might help to fund it. Because we must understand, with the exception of maybe two museums in the world, they receive funding from private individuals, and for the most part, and some government funding. And Barbados Museum is no different, where our operational monies come from people who come through the gate, and it comes from people who understand what our mission is and helps us to support it. So going online allows us a larger engagement. Um, a couple of years ago, coming up to the 50th, Natalie, who's here, had a brilliant idea where we talked about reaching up Barbadian diaspora, and we did Barbados Beyond Boundaries. And two of the more interesting posts were, I think there's a young person in Australia, and then there was a first generation Barbadian Swede whose mom was Swedish, his dad was Barbadian, and he was a snowboarder, professional snowboarder, who then said, "Oh, I want to represent Barbados in snowboarding because this is where my father is from." But he never would have reached out if there wasn't that attempt and that conduit by which the reaching out could be done. And years before, it might have been traveling exhibitions from the museum to the missions overseas. But the digital makes it more upfront, makes it more immediate. So that is one of the ways that we do, in fact, need to pivot. And it doesn't necessarily detract away from bringing people through the gate. But I will say it's not cheap to do it right.
Right.
And that's the other, and that's the other. But that was a really fantastic question, and thank you. Natalie?
So the next question we have is from Tatisha on Facebook, who says, Greg, thank you for this fruitful discussion. Any ideas on how to tie in the education sector and the museum as a way to cultivate patronage at a younger age?
I think you have to, that's a great question. You have to make it fun. At the moment, I guess that the museum's audience tends to skew older. How do you get young people involved? And they want to touch, feel, have fun, play, do all kinds of things. So maybe you make them all curators for a day. Just have fun with it, right? What would you do if you were the curator? How would you do things? What do you want to see? And by exploring that themselves, they'll find out what they don't want and what they do want. But the question addresses a critical issue. How do you get tomorrow's consumers in today and into appreciating it? Because without tomorrow's consumers, we're all dead. So they have to find some way. And I think it's got to be immersive. It's got to be fun. It's got to be lighthearted. History for them should be fun, should be interesting, and why not, cook? The George Washington House does a great job of having dinner with George. You know that. You eat the food that he would have eaten, the same way it would have been presented, the same food, and delivered to you by these people who are dressed in period costume. Could we do that for the kids? Could we give them, pone or coconut bread or whatever in that way? So you make it an experience. And that's just one way. Back to what Kevin said, you hook them in with that, and you find another one and another one and another one. So the short answer, I think, is experience, immersive, and fun.
All right. Greg's almost said what I would have said. I will simply add to that, Natisha. 2 weeks from today, come and see our children's gallery. I think some of what you've just asked for, you will see there. And it's about playing and exploring and making it fun. Any other questions?
No, not at this time.
Okay. But I'll get back to Natisha because what she's really hit on the head is how do museums deliver an experience? And more important question, should museums deliver an experience? The answer is yes. And the experience has to be factual and contextual, but I think that museums can. And it's about creating those experiences grounded in history, grounded in fact, that allows people to still explore, have fun, build something, make something that when they leave, they might only remember one or two things, and that's okay, because guess what? They're going to want to come back. And I think that's the pivotal thing. And that does not in any way take away from what the core work of a museum is, and that is to continue to collect those things that make people who they are. But it's the interpretation and delivery of experience that keeps people coming through. It might even allow some of them to give an artifact at some time, but later on to help to fund the museum and continue its mission. And I think that's really, really important. So yeah, I totally agree.
Right. Kevin, sorry, we did just receive one more question from Julia on Facebook. Well, a comment really, who says, I think Arlington has a very interactive setup. However, just the word museum seems to turn off the average young person. Don't know if either of you have a response to that.
Fair point. You have to agree to find something out. Arlington, by the way, once you've been there once, there's no point going back because it's very fixed, and that's a case of money. You've been there, it's interesting, you go there once, and it's nice, but you don't want to go back. You've seen it, that's enough. And there's the rub. How do you keep them interested, and how do you avoid spending all that much money? Yeah, and Harley says call it an experience. Yeah, why not? Because
we perhaps can. I'll ask, and if Anne is here in Barbados, and this is now perhaps money, so I'll get myself in trouble. Have you ever been to exchange one? And I do hope you come to explore too. But I agree, it is about the experience. And right now, museums are even going through great angst in trying to decide what they are, and in fact, what constitutes a museum. And there's a great ideological tug. This is not the place for that. But I would say part of it too is making museums cool. There was a time when museums were cool, and I think it's down to the experience that they can create. But as institutions, it's the experiences, if they're really fantastic and engaging, that people will forget that the word museum turns them off. But I'm willing to try the experiment.
Kevin,
Oh,
if I may add,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to add a comment about the notion of experiences that you and Greg have been talking about with museums. And I know that we discuss this quite often, but the sense of museums, especially in the Caribbean, having a social responsibility to address issues like critical race theory within some of the experiences that are shown. So, some of the examples that came up, for instance, at George Washington House, although they are very engaging and interactive, they may be skimming over some of the realities of going back into that time, and therefore maybe erasing some of the issues that we do need to be discussing. And so it's trying to find that balance of having, engaging museum experiences while still having a social responsibility and a role in facilitating some discussions.
That's why it's so critical.
Everyone, you'll never please everyone.
Yeah, but that's why it's so critically important, as I said, that whatever the experience is must be contextual and must be based in fact. The worst thing that you can do for any museum experience is not to be honest with your audience. And your audience is well read enough and smart enough to know when you're not telling them the full truth. And that is one of the reasons why they won't come back. But yes, I totally agree, Natalie. And also museums do, especially now I shouldn't say whatever, especially now where they're being confronted by a rise of populism that wants to deny fact and deny the rights of others. So I found it interesting, Greg, in your scenario, the discussion about LGBTQ. And the fact is LGBTQ has always been here. And there's that responsibility for museums to tell that story, and to tell that story in an inclusive way, and to tell that story that both educates, that perhaps, if necessary, can bring some form of reconciliation and over time discussions of equity, but it's necessary. And the museum is that safe space in which those stories need to be and ought to be told.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, Therese just gave us a really nice shout out. Thank you. I highly recommend the exchange. Thank you for that. The museum was commissioned to create that for the central bank, and we manage it for them. So thank you. We're going to somehow use that somehow in our marketing. So thank you for that, Therese. Um, but yes, it is important that when we party like it's 1850, we really discuss all the elements of whatever that party is, um, and maybe reveal what have been attempts to erase, reveal those hidden histories, that we get a better contextual feel and a better understanding, for all the players that would have played a particular part. Yeah, I think that's critically important. I look around, we've I can't say we've not done it. We're starting to confront that in our stories and the stories that we tell here. But then I look outside of Barbados and see great attempts to hide behind some made up mythology of who people think they should be when it's so far from the truth. And I just leave that there. Yeah, yeah. Some of the things that you did mention, um, where is it? I did make notes as you were going through. Um, because okay, I'll say this about 2030. It's really soon here. It's going to be here in less than what 8 9 years.
Yeah.
In that period, we will become a republic in a year's time. We are our capital city is going to be 400 years in 6 years time. The population of Barbados over 60 is going to double just around 2030 as well. So all of these things are happening, and happening in an increasingly smaller global world where issues of supply of fresh water and access not only to food but nutritious food is going to be one of the growing concerns. Um, And so, what role does the museum have to play in that? How do we then become advocates of change? I'm not saying I have the answer, but it's one of those questions that we do need to consider when we look as to what our social responsibility
You need
is.
to be bold, take action. No
Yep.
one's stopping you. You'll make some false steps, no question. But that's the only way to learn. Go for it.
Yep. Yep. I don't disagree. And I think, with the team that we have and people coming in and having suggestions from persons like you and others, that we take on board. I think that is even more possible. Um, but yes, um, yeah, I don't. I must admit, I don't see a dystopian future. I'm a bit too optimistic. I see a future that is difficult, but we've gone through many difficult futures that at the point in time is called the present. That we've been able to overcome. What I would say this week, um, triggers that optimism in a way is, a couple days ago, we were lucky to be graced by two gentlemen, um, both descendants of those Barbadians who would have gone to Liberia in 1895, coming home, actively coming home. And one man made the comment to us, he's the first person from his family who's come back to Barbados in 151 years. And he won't be the last, because there's a whole community that views Barbados as home, and want to come home. They want to visit, they want to engage. Some might want to come home to settle. And it says to me that there are multiple stories there yet to be told in that interaction, uh, so that we understand how they might have lived, that we can
That's
learn from.
one good way forward, Kevin. But the beauty of, I know we're coming to the end, but the beauty
Mhm.
of scenario planning, it allows us to look at both the possible bad future and possible good future, and then look at ways that we would tell which one is coming true,
Yep.
and then be prepared for either one. So it isn't always good, it isn't always bad, there's always a mixture.
Mm. So since you've done this with so many other people, and I note that BNB and BS&T no longer exist, but that K Shepherd listened to you and rightly so, given given what has occurred, and maybe accelerated by COVID. Have you found that those businesses that have taken to heart your scenario training have somehow been able to plan their way to a better future?
Yes, the ones that take it on board and take it seriously, yes. But look at the media. The media saw it. The media were very interested in it. And they said, Harold Hoyt and I had a long discussion about it, but he was unable to grasp it and do anything with it. He could see it intellectually, he got it. But he was unable to take action because of external forces that were being bought over soon by One Caribbean. There were all kinds of things that were stopping him. And then he retired soon after that. So knowing the future is one thing, being able to act on it is something else altogether.
Okay.
That's where your ideas will come into fruition early.
Okay. Well, mine and the teams. I'm not going to say that they're mine. There's an entire team, and that's the most important thing. Um, hmm. I also don't. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm slowly seeing an interest again in Bridgetown. I don't think it's going to die as quickly as we think it would be. What might happen is that how it functions might change. In fact, it might do a jump back to the past in order to make itself future proof. And that is perhaps more residential. That might bring in a particular type of business, whether the business is food or services or medicinal, rather than the place where you go for your banking and you do your major business. It reverts back to a lived in city, with those amenities.
Some people have that dream. I know it's a very good dream. It's a very noble dream. Our projections, however, say it won't happen for 20 or 30 years. And at the moment, the best it can be, I think, is a theme park with its history, all the things that are happening with shopping.
The
And
shopping.
a theme park with shopping. And maybe at the end, towards that, they'll have a couple of projects to bring people back and they will come back. But there are all kinds of issues there.
All right, but that's a discussion that, because I know time is getting short. That's a discussion with you that I would like probably continue offline because I find that interesting. Um, Thank you, Anne. That's more interesting. Notwithstanding the surreal, she says that her daughter is currently working to digitize collections at Trinity College Dublin. Um, you should let her, as she comes home, give us a call. Digitization as another element of that digital content creation is extremely important and necessary in helping to tell stories and provide content. And in fact, it speaks to one of the things that as a country we perhaps need to pivot to a little faster, and that is knowledge creation and knowledge content creation. I know Barbadians who sit at home and do work for Netflix and animation studios all over the world, and they're in a minority. Um, but I think it's about training and access. And if we train more people across multiple areas and have a really good IT infrastructure, then the ability then to have a job outside of Barbados while still living here is possible. And I think that might be one of the saving graces for us as a society. Um,
Kevin, I don't mean to be rude, but as I mentioned earlier, I have a hard stop at 7:30.
no, and that's fine. We're getting there. I'm about to wrap up. I know that Natalie's going to come on and
Okay.
give her a vote of thanks. Mine really was about thanking you for sharing this with us, and I look forward to actually doing this again and thanking those viewers who not only came but provided really good questions and comments. And I'm going to hand back to Natalie in order that she say good night.
But by the way, in 10 years' time, you can tell us if we were right or wrong.
So true. So true.
All right. Well, thank you, Greg, so much for a very interesting presentation. Definitely gave a lot of food for thought. And thank you to both Greg and Kevin for a wonderful conversation and discussion that followed. the presentation. Thanks to everybody who was here with us tonight on this very rainy, stormy night, either on Zoom or on Facebook. We really appreciate you joining with us and sharing your thoughts and comments and participating in this discussion. And yeah, I hope everybody has a lovely and safe evening.
All right, thank you.
all.
Right.
Good night.
Good night.